Boy, what a passage. This passage from the Gospel of Matthew, right? Third Sunday, and we're already going to the controversial. This passage from Matthew is challenging, isn't it? And it's not just challenging, it's disturbing. And even more than disturbing, it's outright scandalous. And this Jesus that ignores, this Jesus that disregards, this Jesus that insults, that's not my Jesus. That's not my Jesus. Is that yours? Is that your Jesus? Sound unfamiliar to you? That's not my Jesus. If you've ever read anything about this passage, you'll see, and it often comes in Bible commentaries, that there are many others who have said the same thing. This is not my Jesus. And then they make attempts to try to explain it away, to defend, to downplay Jesus' words here. Oh, no, wait. Jesus got something else in mind here. He's not doing what he's actually doing here, y'all. He's got something else in mind. Let's be brave. Let's take Jesus, let's take the Bible for what it says. Let's be brave and say that, you know what? Yeah, this is how Jesus was. And let's see where it takes us. So who is this Jesus? This Jesus is the same Jesus we talked about last week. And if you remember, when we were talking about Jesus walking on the water, we were talking about the big context, what's happening in the life of Jesus at this time. And what's happening is that Jesus is on the run, right? You remember me saying that? That Jesus' friend, his relative, his partner in ministry, John the Baptist, has been killed, that there's hostile forces against him around Jerusalem, and now Jesus' ministry is being pushed further and further and further away from Jerusalem. And it pushes him so far that Jesus is now pushed all the way up north into what is present-day Lebanon, in the region of Tyre and Sidon. Jesus, as it were, is a southerner in a northern land. A southerner. And he's not just a southerner geographically speaking. Jesus is also a southerner in terms of his heritage. Here in this passage, the Canaanite woman refers to Jesus as the son of David. And bing, 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 this sends off signals in our mind, because anytime we start talking about David and his family, we think about the tribe of Judah. And the tribe of Judah is that southern tribe in the land of Israel. And this southern tribe had a very particular way of talking about others that were surrounding them. This woman's identity, this woman that Jesus meets in this northern land, the Bible says that she is a Canaanite. A Canaanite. This is not just some random detail. Anybody know who the Canaanites were? The Canaanites were a collection of tribes that lived prior to the tribes of Israel coming into the land that we now know as Israel. They're the people before the Israelites, the Canaanites. And according to the southern tradition of Jesus, these Canaanites were meant to be expelled from the land. It says in Exodus. And in Deuteronomy, it says that they are supposed to be exterminated. Expelled, exterminated. And if you read the book of Joshua, you get a kind of detailed account of how the Israelites went about their business. This is tradition of Jesus. And so when we see Jesus acting here towards this Canaanite woman, Jesus is very consistent with the tradition, the heritage of his southern ancestry. We aren't surprised by this, Jesus. Jesus is hostile here. Just when you think that Jesus should exercise a certain kind of hospitality towards this woman, a certain type of, maybe, dare we say, southern hospitality, Jesus is acting far from what we'd expect. Southern hospitality is far from how Jesus is acting here. Southern hospitality. Do we know anything about Southern hospitality? I see some heads nodding a little bit. We know a little bit about Southern hospitality here in the United States. I remember Chad States, he's in the children's room now, but Chad early on told me the story about him going down to Alabama, and Chad found himself, let's say, bewitched by the Southern hospitality. So enamored by our Southern hospitality that Chad wanted to do the unthinkable, and that was buy some Auburn University merchandise, which, according to this Alabama fan, was downright offensive. Such is the case with Southern hospitality. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Southerner. I'm from Alabama, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And I know a little thing about Southern hospitality. And just to give you just one little taste, I went to a school called the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. Ole Miss. And Ole Miss doesn't take much pride in their football as much as it takes pride in the party that surrounds the football. So if you were to find yourself in the Grove on the campus of the University of Mississippi, you would find a large wooded area with these tents all jam-packed, all together in this place where there are thousands and thousands of people, more people outside under these tents than there are in the stadium. And there's this tradition here of hosting. And there are chandeliers hanging from these tents, TVs and food. And if you happen to find yourself down there, you're going to be welcomed. Folks take pride in this. That's Southern hospitality, right? And so if we were to name the characteristics of Southern hospitality, we would say, well, that's warm. It's warm. It's gentle. It's kind. Make you feel like family. It's always something like a religious quality to it, isn't it? This Southern hospitality. That Southern hospitality for everyone? Is it for everybody? Y'all know anything about Southern hospitality? When I'm talking about the other side of Southern hospitality, y'all know what I'm saying? Let me tell you a little short history of Southern hospitality. Southern hospitality gets its start in a landed aristocracy. Think big plantations, right? Big columns, right? That go all the way back towards our nation's founding. And Southern hospitality began as a way for Southerners, this landed class, to really take in travelers that were traveling from far away in the South. You see, the South didn't have a way to accommodate travelers. We didn't have that public transportation that those in the North had. So there was a way in which that if you were traveling in the South, you could go up to one of these plantations and you could find yourself a meal and a home. You think those aristocratic families were providing that hospitality? Who was doing that work? Who's doing that work? Who's providing that hospitality, really? Well, it's enslaved African Americans. That's who's providing that hospitality. That's who's working. And you think that those African Americans experience the same kind of hospitality that a traveler might experience? You think they were welcome at the table? They weren't welcome at that table. And long after those plantations came down, this sort of Southern hospitality continued through Jim Crow, segregation laws, all the way up into the present day where racism still is the way that it is. And if you go down to the South, you'll see very clearly places where white folks belong and places where black folks belong. You'll see it. That's Southern hospitality. And it's not meant for everybody. Now, it's easy to pick on the South. Maybe easy for me too, since I'm from there. But the truth is, there are limits to all types of hospitality. Not just of the Southern kind. That if we really want to be honest with ourselves and talk about our ways of offering hospitality, you will find that you have limitations too. So don't put this off on the South now. That we will find that there are ways in which that we will limit our hospitality to others. There are ways in which that we will close ourselves off, not extend our welcome to those that are different from us, those who have different power, those who have different status, those who have different ethnicity or religion. We will find ways to limit our hospitality. That's who we are as human beings. What ways do we limit our hospitality here in this church, at the Abbey? Do we have limits to our hospitality? Do we have a certain type of Southern hospitality where we say all are welcome here? Is it true? No matter where you are, where you're from, you're welcome here? Is that true? Is there just an understanding that only certain kinds of people are welcome here? Do we have a limit to our hospitality? What makes us so uncomfortable about this Jesus that we find in Matthew's gospel is that actually this Jesus right here that we read about in Matthew chapter 15, this Jesus is just a little too close to us. He's just a little too much like us. That's what really bothers us when we get down to it, right? He's just a little too human. His hospitality is just a little too Southern. That makes us uncomfortable. But you know what else? You know what really, really makes us uncomfortable? Jesus changes. Jesus changes. And because Jesus changes, that means, you know what that means, y'all? That means that you and I, we're invited to change too. And quite frankly, that's an uncomfortable thing. Jesus changes, and so are we. And there's something, if we look closely at this passage, we can find ways in which that we too can change. Let's look at what Jesus does. Now, Jesus, I said, is a Southern, but he's not bound by his boundaries. Jesus wanders off. He's not afraid to engage in difference, to get outside of his comfort zone. Jesus knows what it means to enter a place where he doesn't belong, to be the one in the room where he's different. Jesus knows what it means to engage difference. Now, the other thing, Jesus holds his tradition and heritage, as well as the opinions of his peers, the disciples. He knows to hold those loosely. Hold them loosely. Yes, this is what Jesus has received. And yes, this is what his peers are telling him, to send the Canaanite woman away. And even though Jesus says it, he still holds it loosely. And how do we know that? Well, when the Canaanite woman comes forward and she asks Jesus for help, Jesus changes. Jesus exercises a sort of hospitality of the mind, if you will, that when this woman comes to him and offers Jesus a different vision for how we should treat others that are different, that come from different backgrounds to us, she offers Jesus a whole new way of seeing the world. Jesus takes that in, he welcomes it. He lets it sit for a while. Maybe in silence. He lets it sit. And if you let it sit long enough, it starts to change you. Jesus changes. This idea all of a sudden, it changes his tradition, his heritage, his past. No longer does Jesus live within the confines of what his southern heritage said he should do. All of a sudden, he has a new way of being. It's a new vision. It's what Chris read in Isaiah, where all of a sudden, God's salvation for everybody. It's for everyone. Not just the nation of Israel. It's open to all. And all of a sudden, Jesus makes this change. And he has a new worldview in mind. And all of a sudden, Jesus is more like Jesus. You mean to tell me that because Jesus welcomed a Canaanite woman, another person, Jesus became more of himself? Think about that, y'all. Do you realize the implications of that? For us as a church, for you as individuals, you know what the implications are? That means that your knowledge of God depends upon your ability to welcome another into your life. To have that sort of hospitality, that sense of welcome. That as a church, our ability to realize our mission depends upon our welcoming of another, an outsider. That our identity is incomplete without somebody else. Somebody that maybe we're rejecting. Oh boy. So, we find ourselves one Sunday, some stranger comes walking through our door. How might our welcome change? How might our welcome be different? We wouldn't just say these words in our welcome statement differently, friends. We would act different. They would see it on our faces. That, you know what? When we welcome someone into this space, into our hearts, into our minds, it's not just that we're welcoming, that we are acknowledging that this person is looking for Jesus. No, friends, what we're doing is that we're looking at them and we're seeing Jesus in them. They're not just looking for Jesus here. We are looking for Jesus in them. How's that going to change the way we do welcome? Jesus says in Matthew chapter 25, verse 35, I am a stranger, and you welcome me. May it be so for the Abbey Reformed United Church of Christ. Amen.